Dean of the Faculty here at Washington and Jefferson College. I'd like to join the President, Herring Smith, and our Director, Diana Stairs, in welcoming you to this Energy Summit. Following the summit's engaging panel from just a few minutes ago, I'm delighted to take a few minutes now to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Susan Eisenhower. Ms. Eisenhower is president of the Eisenhower Group, Incorporated, an independent organization that provides strategic counsel to clients on political, business, and public affairs projects. She's also chairman of leadership and public policy programs at the Eisenhower Institute, serving the Institute's founding, or as the Institute's founding director and its first president, and becoming known during that period for her work in the former Soviet Union in the energy field. Energy to a greater degree and outer space to a lesser degree are the twin areas to which Ms. Eisenhower has dedicated most of her effort. Indeed, her interest in and thought about energy are considerable. From the liberation of energy from traditional and alternative sources, to energy dependence and independence, to nuclear opportunity and responsibility, to the transmission of energy, and even to energy security. All of these are but a sampling along the rich energy policy spectrum routinely addressed by Ms. Eisenhower. In January 2010, Secretary of Energy Stephen Chu appointed her to serve on the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future, which has been tasked with developing a long-term solution for safely managing the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle. She has testified before the Senate Armed Services and Senate Budget Committees on policy toward the region of the former Soviet Union. She was also appointed to the National Academy of Sciences Standing Committee on International Security and Arms Control, where she served for 8 years. In the spring of 2000, the Secretary of Energy appointed her to a Blue Ribbon Task Force, the Baker-Cutler Commission, to evaluate U.S.-funded nuclear non-proliferation programs in Russia. Since that time, she has served as an advisor on 2 other DOE studies, one on the threat of nuclear terrorism and the other a Blue Ribbon panel on the future of nuclear energy. In 2001, after 2 terms on the NASA Advisory Council, she was appointed to the International Space Station Management and Cost Evaluation Task Force. She has served as an academic fellow of the International Peace and Security Program of Carnegie Corporation of New York, as a director of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and as an advisor to Johns Hopkins NITSA School of Advanced International Studies. Ms. Eisenhower has been a fellow at Harvard's JFK School of Government's Institute of Politics and a distinguished fellow at the Nixon Center. She currently sits on the Nuclear Threat Initiative Board, the Energy Future Coalition, and is an advisor to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Institute for 21st Century Energy, and is an advisor to the Air Force Academy's Eisenhower Center for Space and Defense Studies. Ms. Eisenhower's first professional experience, however, was as a writer. She's written 3 books, including bestsellers Breaking Free and Mrs. Ike, and she's edited 4 collected volumes on regional security issues. She's a marvelous communicator and has written chapters for a number of collected volumes and penned literally hundreds of op-ed pieces and articles on foreign and domestic policy for publications such as the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, and the London Spectator. She's provided analysis for numerous news agencies and news programs, including CNN International, MSNBC, The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, Fox News, Hardball with Chris Matthews, the BBC, and others. Ms. Eisenhower has received numerous prizes and awards and 4 honorary doctorates. She's also a teacher, which is special for us here at Washington and Jefferson College. She's worked with undergraduate students at the Eisenhower Institute on individual and group projects within Strategy and Leadership in Transformational Times. That's a program that she designed at Gettysburg College that highlights the vital intersection between strategy and leadership, while emphasizing the truly transformational times we are living in today. And she's with us here today, fittingly, as the keynote speaker for the inaugural event of a Center for the Study of Energy Policy, a center located at a liberal arts undergraduate college. What a fitting place for her, and what a wonderful opportunity for us. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Susan Eisenhower.
Thank you very much, Jay, for that wonderful introduction. You probably wonder how I've manage to cover such a wide waterfront, but if you're ever involved in U.S.-Soviet relations, you had to become proficient in three things: nuclear weapons, space, and energy. And so there is some way that it all comes together. Actually, probably around one of the biggest strategic challenges the United States ever faced. That was a confrontation with the Soviet Union. And so it gives me great pleasure to be here today to talk on the energy realm. I've spent a big part of my career on energy, and it is, of course, the lifeblood of all economies. As a matter of fact, I'd like to raise the discussion a bit to a larger strategic plane, as a matter of fact. This came up so much in the panel earlier, and I was most interested to hear that there is a full consensus that we do not have an energy strategy in this country at the moment. I certainly look forward to speaking to that. But if we could think about the great shifts that have taken place globally in the last 20 years, it's extraordinary. The geopolitical tectonic plates shifted with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and many of the results of those historic events are still being felt. As a matter of fact, it reminds me a little bit of my first employer had a poster behind the main desk in his office, and it was this rather exhausted-looking ape on its side, and the caption said, "Just when I figured out the answers to life, they went and changed the questions." I'm a great believer in that, as a matter of fact, because today we're asked to think the unthinkable across a whole range of issues, not just in the energy field, because after all, climate change is one of the big drivers for the shift in energy that we're making today. But we're being asked to think of all sorts of other things. I mean, for the first time, really, in a most serious way, Americans are thinking about the economic constraints on this country in a way that we never did before. And we actually are being asked to think the unthinkable about America's own solvency and its own reputation as a country that can manage its own resources and its own long-term strategy. This summer, I think few people in the country really realized how close we came to the abyss globally. And so since so many things are shifting and changing at the moment, it is fair to say that we are in one of those great transitional times. And yet, we're really living in kind of a peculiar period. We have a 24-hour news cycle, we have quarterly earning reports, we have pressure on politicians. We now have what would be called the endless campaign. That's not only for Congress, but for the presidency as well. And all of this against a backdrop of a kind of democratization of opinion and attitude. Largely, I think, that demonstrates that the public debate is around some pretty crucial issues, quite untethered to the facts. And so it's incumbent on all of us, especially those who are inaugurating this important center here at Washington and Jefferson College, to remark on the huge job ahead of us to educate the public about not only the challenges, but the critical nature of these challenges and the timeline we have for affecting them. So to step back and put this into a broader perspective, I had a mentor who was a General Andrew J. Goodpaster, and he sat in an office next to mine for 7 years. Andrew J. Goodpaster commanded NATO forces in Europe. He was a protege of George Marshall and Dwight Eisenhower, and he always had something interesting to say about contemporary events. But he used to say to me, "Susan, you know what the problem is here? You have to think of the United States and its challenges like a tent. And we have long poles in the tent, and we have short poles in the tent." And he said, "I can't tell you how distressing it is to wake up every morning and read the paper and see that we're talking only about the short poles. The long poles in the tent are the poles that, if they collapse, the tent will fall in." And that's the way a strategist thinks, is to be thinking about the long poles. And so this is one of the reasons I've always been attracted to those main areas I talked to you about. Energy is indeed a long pole. Now, General Goodpaster would have defined the long poles in the tent as being energy, our fiscal and economic health, and our relations with countries abroad, and that would include war fighting and other things. But those three long poles. So the thing that makes energy particularly interesting is it cross-cuts the other two, maybe becoming the largest pole of all. Energy security, which is a new buzzword in the field, has to assure supply of energy, a reliability of getting the energy that's been generated to the marketplace and to the consumer, and access to affordable supplies. At the same time, as we well know, because of the oil that we purchase overseas, energy takes on big military considerations. In addition to the fact that you might be interested to know the United States military is the largest consumer of energy in the world. It consumes about as much oil as the country of Sweden on a per annual basis. And so these long poles interlock around energy, making education and public information on this subject of crucial importance. Unfortunately, because so much of opinion today is untethered to the facts, a lot of people get by with bumper stickers that describe an objective but are not connected to really the full depth of the challenge itself. And as a matter of fact, these bumper stickers can be the benchmarks for an emotional response. It's interesting, about 15 years ago, climate change was the existential threat facing the globe. Today, nobody talks about it anymore. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure I heard one person mention it, or maybe casually at the panel. It's indicative that today, because somebody willed that it wasn't good, that it isn't happening, that we no longer talk about it as one of the chief objectives in making the energy transformation that's underway. We're much more likely to hear the term energy independence as the driver for our policy. I must say I went to a forum not too long ago and was a tad distressed to hear a member of Congress who was in a position to know tell the audience that we needed to strive for energy independence, and this is the reason we needed to build windmills and solar panels as a renewable source of energy that would address this problem. It was a little difficult to kind of try and delicately correct the congressman by reminding the public, of course, that we do not generate electricity from oil. There may be one reactor left in the United States that does that. This is a thimbleful, as they'd say in the energy area, of electricity that is generated from foreign sources. As a matter of fact, in terms of energy independence in the electricity sector, the United States is virtually energy independent already. And so I think it's absolutely crucial in talking about energy to parse out transportation energy from electricity energy. And I have hung my hat on electricity for the very simple reason that electricity really is the lifeblood of our economy. In 2010, just to put this into perspective, the United States used 13 times more electricity than we did in 1950. This is 13 times. And over the last 30 years, 85% of the growth in the U.S. economy has been supplied by electricity. And so while there is a huge focus, of course, on transportation fuels, which are a critical element of the energy picture, especially with respect to our fiscal situation, as was previously mentioned, we have to realize at the moment that if we plug in an electrical car, we will actually be raising our carbon footprint because we will be plugging it into a wall socket that produces electricity largely from coal. And so if we don't parse these things out carefully, if we don't move to a green electricity future, we will not be able to meet the dual objective of reducing our dependence on foreign sources of oil at the same time remaining in a carbon-constrained environment. Well, I don't think I have to convince you how important electricity is. I had a couple of times in my adult life to see the consequences of what it's like in an environment that does not produce reliable electricity. In Great Britain in the 1970s, I don't know how many of you have seen Iron Lady, but that movie did not do an adequate job of describing the catastrophe of Great Britain in the 1970s. At that time, for 3 winters in a row, we had what was called the Three-Day Workweek. Industry went on strike in the United States, or I'm sorry, in Great Britain, causing power outages. They were planned power outages for 3, 6, and 9 hours a day on a rotational basis for those 3 winters. If you don't think that electricity is the lifeblood of the economy, you should look at the financial figures from Great Britain in the 1970s. It was just devastating. And then, of course, the blackout of 2003. This was a reliability question. It's interesting, I was on the 14th floor of a hotel room in New York City, and they evacuated all the buildings, put everybody out into the street. I can say, as somebody who worked on the nuclear terrorism issue, you do not want people out on the street. As a matter of fact, you don't want people out on the street for any reason unless there's a direct hit to your building. So this is my public education moment here. Stay inside, okay? Because even chemical attacks, the chemicals go to the ground, not to higher surfaces. So they did the wrong thing in 2003, but as it turned out, it was a blackout caused by overheating on the transmission lines that caused the transmission lines to sag, thus hitting some trees and affecting 50 million Americans and Canadians all up and down the eastern seaboard, costing the economy $10 billion for that 36-hour power outage. And so this is a critical area, and we are at a transformational time. It's a wild transformational time. Because of emotional bumper stickers, we are rapidly in the business, I think, of jeopardizing our long-term national security picture with respect to the energy field. Just to give you some idea of what challenge we're being faced, let me put it in some really stark numbers. Because of a transmission system that has been cobbled together ever since the 1850s, when Thomas Edison established the first grid of 59 customers in Lower Manhattan. Through this period, we have by now an antiquated, in many places, grid. We have certain parts of our grid system that is in distress on any given day, depending on the load. And at the same time, we have a transformational period with respect to the sources of electrical generation. Industry, therefore, is looking at a number of big steps it has to make, some of it due to recent EPA regulations and a campaign against coal for a variety of reasons. I say that without any judgment. It's just a fact that the public and the government has decided that we have to make a rapid transition from coal, which makes sense in a carbon-constrained world. But by 2020, industry will spend $100 billion to cut emissions from coal plants. That's $100 billion between now and 2020. And by 2030, industry, or I should say the energy field, is going to have to spend $2 trillion to upgrade, replace, and expand power production and delivery infrastructure. This is a big number, ladies and gentlemen, by any stretch of the imagination. And so when we say we have no strategy for energy, we're saying we have no strategy for helping industry understand how those investments should be made. We have a very episodic way of looking at our no strategy as a no strategy energy policy. I say that because I'm actually the proud owner of my very own Yucca Mountain mug. I actually got a chance to go into the tunnel at Yucca Mountain before it was taken off the table as a nuclear repository. And so I'm really glad. It may be of value someday on eBay, but currently I'm using it for my toothbrush and toothpaste. In any case, I also had the opportunity to go visit the carbon capture and sequestration facility at Mountaineer. And I can tell you that at the time, and this is only about a year ago, it was the country's only full fuel cycle carbon capture and sequestration. We've had other projects around the country that have tested either the capture part of it or experiments on sequestration, but this was the full cycle. It's now closed. It's now closed because the marketplace wasn't going to step forward to invest in clean coal. And so what you have now is, because we relied entirely on the marketplace, some of the greatest prospects for carbon reduction, that would be nuclear energy and clean coal, is now going to be a much longer prospect. Bringing us, of course, to the fact that we've got a coal industry that is slowly making a transformation into gas. Because of the Solyndra affair in Washington and an aversion to, let's call it straight out subsidies to the renewables. Renewables are under fire. And now because of Fukushima in Japan, the nuclear industry is under fire. And so maybe this is great news for people in central Pennsylvania, those who live near, the Saudi Arabia of shale gas here in this area. But I would submit that it's not a healthy thing for any country to put all of its energy eggs in one basket. So to get these other projects underway again is going to take an act of political and public will. So let's talk about the others for a minute and the challenges facing the renewables area. The renewables actually show a great deal of promise, but whatever politician, who will remain nameless, by the way, thinks that we can accomplish our electricity by renewable sources alone is fooling you. The Energy Information Agency projects that at most it could ever be in the 15 to 20% category, and this is many decades from now. The main problem, and I'm a great supporter of renewables, but the main problem is that where we have them in most abundant supply, the generating points there are not connected to the national grid. Urgently, we need to build transmission from the windy plains where energy can be generated through wind farms and the southwest of the United States. These need to be connected to the grid if this is going to have any prospect at all. Also, for those of you who need an extra sentence or two on this subject, I'd like to remind you that renewables are intermittent. They do not provide a base load of electricity. And so they are going to have to be backed up either by natural gas or by battery technology that is still in development. And so this makes a great challenge in the renewable area, but one I think that's important to pursue. In the nuclear area, I should say that our commission, the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future, has now submitted its rather lengthy report to the Secretary of Energy and to the White House. That was a 2.5-year adventure on my part. We traveled all over the world. We heard any number of countries, some of them our partners and allies, some of them with large economies as well, tell us how they're organizing their energy strategy, and I would like to tell you they're a lot more organized on this front than we are. But nuclear energy has suffered, of course, from the fact that it has its connections in some respects to the bomb. I would tell you, though, that this is far more complicated, and I pick up stories in the paper about nonproliferation and nuclear energy, and I think we all need to go back and have a primer on that one again, too. In any case, nuclear energy is the only carbon-free baseload source of electrical generation, and in addition to that, it is the only energy source that actually prepays for the disposition of its waste. We pay for that in our utility rates, those utilities that generate electricity with nuclear power. And so, as a matter of fact, when we compare the prices of different forms of electricity generation, we rarely factor in the fact that the money has already been collected through the Nuclear Waste Fund for the disposition of nuclear waste. The fact that the federal government has been unable to meet its obligations and to take title to this waste is another story. Furthermore, I think the nuclear industry has not only been set back because we haven't solved the repository issue. I hope if you're interested that you'll have a look at our report. I think it was pretty radical, as a matter of fact, in many ways, and I'd be delighted to take questions. But nuclear also suffers from fantastic misinformation about radiation and the cost-benefit assessment. We had, while I was on the commission, we had many briefings about the Fukushima crisis while it was unfolding in real time, not only from the chairman of TEPCO, but from the Department of Energy and everyone in this country that was monitoring that. Few people realized that the reactors there in Fukushima survived the earthquake. and outperformed their design bases. The crisis there revolved around the tsunami. More questions on that would be welcome later. In any case, with the age of some of these nuclear reactors, and believe me, they are licensed to print money because they were amortized long ago. Nevertheless, some of them are, many of them are between 30 and 50 years old, and these will eventually come offline unless we have a program to renew them. Imagine how much more carbon will be put into the atmosphere if these nuclear plants come offline and aren't replaced. And furthermore, it will be a loss of electricity. Let me finally say that I don't think that the nuclear industry sometimes talks about its product very well. I was absolutely intrigued. It's one of the reasons I migrated from nuclear weapons policy into nuclear energy. So I was intrigued by the fact that through a program called Megatons to Megawatts, the United States of America is actually using electricity in this country that was generated by Soviet-era nuclear warheads aimed on this country. 1 in every 10 light bulb is electrified by a warhead that was part of our confrontation with the Soviet Union. It's pretty exciting. I mean, that is the essence of megatons to megawatts, swords into plowshares, and the peaceful uses of nuclear power. As a matter of fact, very soon, 20,000 warheads will have been blended down into reactor-grade fuel and used in America's nuclear power plants. So I guess despite that good news, though, nuclear is still, still hovers with a question mark next to it. So I guess if you were calling these the energy sweepstakes, it looks like gas is the winner. This will probably be a mixed blessing in an area like this because it offers enormous potential prosperity. At the same time, it brings with it, of course, community dislocation and other transitional things. I mean, I'm sure you know that already the natural gas discoveries have created 100,000 jobs, and the natural gas fracking industry has generated as much as $76 billion in revenues. This is a huge amount of money that offers a great promise to this country, and we are so grateful. Anybody who thinks about this for 5 minutes in the energy field has to realize what an enormous boon this is going to be to this country. At the same time, there is no free lunch in energy. All you have to do is think about gas explosions, mining accidents, oil spills in the Gulf. Actually, by the way, though, I do have to say that there's never been a death in this country to nuclear energy. But having said that, it still comes with its risks. So there will be no such thing as a free lunch. And we do see a huge conversion underway right now between coal and natural gas. About 11% has already been converted from coal to gas in the generation side. And some of the largest coal utilities have made as much of a 24% transition to natural gas. Now, gas is I'm afraid if we're going to really think long-term and be serious about climate change, we'll have to think of natural gas perhaps as a transition fuel in certain areas. But it's here to stay, and it is a huge boon for our economy. However, you could see a number of things that may come online that will take some of the euphoria out of our rhetoric on this subject. One, of course, is price volatility. Natural gas has had a history of this. And as we see it more and more as a solution to a whole series of problems, the demand for natural gas is going to go up significantly. That would be the demand for natural gas around generation, the demand for natural gas around the transportation fleet, and of course, the demand for natural gas is an export commodity. And that, of course, will look even more attractive as we continue to face down our financial problems in this country. I don't need to mention public confidence. You would know an awful lot more about that than I would. But all of these things make you wonder whether we really ought to have all of our eggs in one basket. But they will be in one basket unless somebody with the capacity to exercise some political leadership will set a level playing field so that we can evaluate all of these energy sources, and sometimes even to invest in energy sources that are not going to be as inexpensive, but will be there in case everything else, in case other sources are challenged. Finally, let me just end this little tour through the energy field by talking about transmission. I didn't hear too much about that this morning, and with a modernized transmission system, we can avoid building any number of generation power plants just because of the inefficiencies in transmission at the moment are causing tremendous losses in the lines. So it's a great thing that we're all turning off our lights and we're trying to conserve energy, but the fastest way to conserve energy would be a modernization of the transmission grid. I don't need to emphasize again that if we lost $10 billion in 36 hours because of a blackout on the east coast of the United States, to see the congestion, especially on the east coast, should be very worrisome for any economic planner. I think there are a number of things that we need to do going forward. I'd like to think of one of them as a kind of back to the future exercise. I was quite amused actually because I was thinking about putting on, I have a little country cottage. I think that's frankly too glamorous a word for this place, but I was going to see if I could fix it up, so I called the contractor in, and he said, you need a really new advanced technology they've got now. It's a gizmo that you plug in your basement, and you have the opportunity to draw down electricity at night when it's inexpensive and use it during the day through this box. I said, wow, advanced technology, is that right? And he said, yes, it's very exciting. This is one of the, our American taxpayer dollars at work or something. I said, what's it called? And he said, gee, I don't know, but he said, it's about this big, like this. And I said, oh, well, maybe it's called a night storage heater. He said, how do you know that? And I said, well, back in the 1970s when I was living in Great Britain, we all had night storage heaters that absolutely did that. You pulled down the cheap electricity at night and you used it during the day. And nobody in Great Britain could wait until they got rid of night storage heaters because they wanted to advance on to central heating and they wanted to advance on to advanced technology, which is the thing we're trying to get off of now. We're going to go back to night storage heaters, ladies and gentlemen. And the other thing is, then I was also told you could get one of those hot water heaters. This hot water on demand. You don't keep the hot water heater hot all day. I said, no kidding. What are those called? And he said, I'm not so sure. I said, well, those are called geysers. What's a geyser? Well, in Great Britain in the 1970s, you'd put a couple of shillings into a metal cylinder that had pipes going around it, and when you put the shillings in, or flipped a switch, whichever you were lucky enough to do, the cylinder would heat up through a infusion of burning gas, and it would heat up the waters that came around the pipes. And everybody in Great Britain couldn't wait until they didn't have to have geysers anymore, and they would have hot water tanks. Well, I must say, I guess I'm making light of the fact that there have always been some very good ideas out there from the past. We tend to call them now advanced technology, when in fact societies that went before us, societies that were constrained by either development or by finances, had many, many excellent suggestions on how to reduce their consumption of electricity. In any case, I'd just like to conclude by saying I think it's absolutely in America's national security interests to have a diversified portfolio, probably not only, well, certainly in the electricity sector, but also probably in the transportation sector. We're moving in that direction, but we've really never stated that as a goal. One other reason we need a diversified portfolio, that when you look at electricity consumption, we're going to need it all. We're going to need it all. And you cannot be in this field and not be concerned about the fact that emotion, public emotion, is driving a trend to pull everything that we know generally works off the table. And so I would say in the coal area, we're going to need to have, whether it's expensive or not, R&D around clean coal technology, and it is not really there, despite what you hear. In the oil and gas area, we're obviously going to have to continue to look for ways to reduce our dependence. But at the same time, I would ask a question that was asked in the 1970s. Should we use all our own resources first and then be even more dependent later? Think about that for a while in the oil area. And so I think since we are going to need everything, we're going to need nuclear because it is the only carbon-free baseload source of electrical generation. It's clean, safe, and offers very high-paying jobs. You get more radiation working at Grand Central Station than you do working in a nuclear power plant. And so public education in that field is absolutely critical. But without fuel diversity, we are going to be economically dependent on market fluctuations of any one of these electrical sources. And finally, the investment in infrastructure and R&D, as I say, are going to be absolutely crucial for moving to our desired set of objectives. National security never came on the cheap. We knew that as we faced the Soviet Union in our confrontation. We didn't think twice about putting together, the most powerful fleets in the Navy and the most powerful Army in the world. We didn't do it on the cheap, nor should we do our energy security on the cheap. If it takes money, we have to explain to the American people there's a difference between consumption and investment. The point was made today about the interstate highway system. The 46,000 miles of interstate highway today have produced $6 for every dollar invested in it. And that is the key to a transmission system that is going to link sources of renewable energy from other parts of the country and bring them to the marketplace. Finally, in thinking up what's cheapest and what's most expedient, we really have not valued stability. There are certain jobs in the energy field I definitely would not want to have as a professional, and one of them is the group that has to make the decisions about which long-term plays to make without any reference points about what at least the regulatory or the governmental framework will be in the years to come. Stability is something that the business community likes. They like it because stability provides the underpinnings for doing business in an efficient and orderly way. This is definitely in America's interest. And so the government does not need to take over the energy field, but it does need to give signals to industry and to consumers and to create the right kind of incentives for us to meet our overarching goals. We do live in a transformational time. Today, electronics and technology has not only changed the way we do business, it has changed the demands we're placing on our energy system. We want to remain competitive in that area. We want our jobs to stay here in America. They need to be near sources of energy generation. And so all of this adds up to a very, very large agenda indeed. And at the end of the day, we should know that we're engaged in the right topic when we do realize that energy is the longest pole in the tent. Thank you very much.